It's a race to save lives that includes the smallest ones. Syria's voluntary civil defense group, the White Helmets, pulled Ahmed out to safety. They say his family's home north of Aleppo has been completely destroyed by the earthquake. Syria was already torn apart by war. It's home to millions of refugees. The White Helmets say Ahmed is one of them. Millions of people are reeling across the region from the horrors they've witnessed.
My wife is still in there. My wife is still in there. One should never give up on hope, but most probably she died.
Venid a mí, todos los que estáis trabajados, os haré descansar.
The first 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit near the Turkish city of Gaziantep in the early hours of the morning. A second 7.5 quake then hit further north in the afternoon. Millions of people across Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Cyprus, and Israel felt them. Now survivors are relying on emergency services to find them, but also on help from their neighbors, friends, and even strangers. This man tied a string to a water bottle and lowered it into the rubble for the survivors trapped beneath.
We have received several offers of international aid for our country. Offers of assistance from 45 countries, including NATO and the European Union, have reached us.
Emergency service teams have been deployed from around the world. They're now on the ground searching for bodies and offering food and shelter. And that help is essential. Many are still missing. This young girl asks, "Where is my mum?" Some who've survived now find themselves homeless. These bonfires are what keep them warm during a biting winter.
We'll be cold here until morning, freezing, getting wet. We've got no place to go, no place to stay. My God, we don't even have a bed.
As for survivors continues, rescue teams have another task at hand: counting the dead in one of the biggest earthquakes to hit the region in decades. Azadeh Mashiri, BBC News.
Just let me bring you the latest pictures that we're getting in from southern Turkey, and you can see there the numbers of volunteers and rescue experts, and that digger, of course. It's always an incredibly complex, fragile operation to try to move the rubble of those collapsed buildings out of the way, being acutely aware of any survivors who are trapped beneath it. And we've been hearing, of course, in the last 24 hours since this earthquake struck, about how the rescuers have been getting calls on mobile phones of people desperately trying to reach out for help. One person telling the BBC how even members of their own family couldn't be reached, and the heartbreak of not being able to get to all of those who are trapped and injured in the rubble. We know that the death toll has risen now to over 3,000, according to the country's Disaster and Emergency Management Authority from Turkey. The latest that Reuters is reporting is 3,381, but sadly we do estimate that more, of course, will have lost their lives. But of course, the urgency now in this period, 24 hours or so after that quake struck, is to try to get to as many people as possible. And we know that many countries from around the world are offering and sending help and teams of experts who can actually get to these sites, but even accessing them with airports affected in the region is not easy. Let's head to one of the cities hit by the quake, the city of Adana in Turkey. Our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman is there for us. Tom, just tell us, Tom Thames sent this in a little while ago. Let's hear what he had to say.
Yeah, this was a 10-story building behind me, which came down in the initial quake. Now, what's happening at the moment is, and this is, you know, a very rare event compared to what's happening across a lot of the region. We've got two diggers here clearing the rubble away from the edge of this, and on top of the building itself, on top of the wreckage, I've counted at least 6 recovery and rescue workers. They're now using cranes to try and lift up parts of the rubble, but it's obviously incredibly precarious work for 2 reasons. First of all, their own safety, because the rubble is very dangerous, and of course the concerns about whether or not there are people still alive under the wreckage here. Now, on the side street here, I was just speaking to quite a few people. They're wrapped in blankets, they've been up all night. Some of them evacuated from this building, others from other buildings in this area. One of the women here that I was just chatting to, her daughter was in this building. The last she knew, she was on the 2nd floor. Now, what she was telling me is that the rescue workers here worked their way down to the 6th floor, but she was on the 2nd floor and there's been absolutely no word. Her mother has been up all night waiting to hear anything, but nothing at all. And she was just telling me of how she's trying to tell her own grandchildren about what's happened. The woman trapped in this building had 2 daughters, she said, in Germany. She was due to go and visit them in the next few days, and she's had to have those conversations with her grandchildren and no word whatsoever. So the kind of scenes being replicated across this region.
Tom Bateman there. Well, Hardin Lang from Refugees International explained to us how sanctions and political instability in Syria have affected the rescue operation on the ground there.
The situation in Syria, particularly the situation in northwest Syria, is acute on chronic, right? For the last over 10 years of conflict, has destroyed a great deal of the infrastructure, punished the civilian population. In northwest Syria, you have 4 million people who are already in need of humanitarian assistance, millions who have been displaced from other parts of the country, who are living very close to the line. You know, the only aid that gets into northwest Syria really comes through a cross-border UN mechanism to supply assistance through one border crossing at this stage. And those 4 million people already were being massively under-resourced. The UN appeal for this year was at less than 50% in terms of its funding. And those populations are the ones that are going to be probably hit the hardest. There are definitely areas controlled by the Syrian government that have also been hit extremely hard. But there's probably greater capacity there to respond. I mean, the Syrian government has a history of brutality and withholding humanitarian assistance, but they do have capacity, and there are UN agencies there to support. In northwest Syria, it's really up to organizations like the White House and civil society groups that are the first line and the last line of defense for the civilian population in responding to this crisis.
Well, I'm joined now from Jerusalem by Seth Frantzman, Middle East security analyst and director of Middle East Centre for Reporting and Analysis. Thanks for your time. Was the tremor felt where you are at all?
No, I didn't feel it in Jerusalem, but I understood that there were people in some parts of Israel in this region that felt it a bit, yes.
And is Israel sending teams to help?
Yeah, Israel sent a delegation last night, and then they're going to send more today via Air Force aircraft and others, and they will look into setting up some sort of a field hospital. Israel has decades of experience sending delegations to earthquake areas like Haiti, Nepal, so there's a lot of experience in terms of search and rescue and aiding survivors. And so hopefully I think they're on the ground today and they'll be moving towards somewhere. It's not clear where they'll end up.
And will teams be sent also to Syria?
So I think the government has said, you know, they're open, of course, to helping Syrians. Israel played a key role enabling humanitarian aid to go into the area of Syria near the Golan Heights during the Syrian civil war. So Israel has some experience in that. But obviously, as we all know, it's gone down because there's some controversy there because Israel doesn't have relations with Syria. But perhaps there is some way that aid can go into those areas of Idlib that are connected to Turkey, where Turkish forces are located. Again, I don't assume that they would go across the border, but the idea of provisioning humanitarian aid or giving, for instance, help at a field hospital to people that might be brought back and forth, that I think is something that's been thought about.
And which other countries who are, you know, allied politically with Syria might have the expertise, do you think, to help people there? Because we know that obviously there's been a lot of international offers of help to Turkey.
Right. I mean, I think that's the big problem we see is that part of Syria where you have multiple different groups, armed groups, militias. You also have many Kurds who were displaced from Afrin that are in Tel Afat next to Aleppo. And the question is, how can aid get to them from Damascus? And we saw last night a large 747 came in from Iran. But again, Iran is a country under sanctions as well. So is Syria. It's not entirely clear how those countries will have the capacity to rapidly bring aid up there. I think the big elephant in the room is that the United States operates in eastern Syria. And if the international community was willing to do more, I think there would be a way to make those, let's say, front lines or whatever more flexible, maybe have some sort of a ceasefire so the aid can go first rather than the factions and the politics on the ground that have divided that landscape.
And I mean, is there enough political control, by the government effectively to allow this fire for international teams to get into those parts of Syria that are affected, do you think?
Well, I think there is. I mean, I think, look, the Russians, Iranians, and the Turks and the Syrian regime have been meeting over the years. We saw the Russians actually host a meeting in Moscow. Now, obviously, Russia's persona non grata, it's invaded Ukraine. But in the end of the day, I think, helping civilians probably matters the most. So maybe this is an opportunity for the United States, Russia, Syria, and Iran, all these countries to actually, be willing to put aside for a few minutes all the different problems they have and talk about some way of bringing in international organizations that work on both sides, because there are obviously organizations that do work on both sides of the line, and enabling some of that aid to get in there.
And is there precedent for that to happen? Because you said, obviously, aid agencies always have to tread a difficult path and try to be non-political, but obviously governments are key to getting money and teams in.
Well, that would be an interesting question. I mean, historically, when there were conflicts, have organizations like the Red Cross or other types of organizations been able to, go across front lines and things? I would think historically, yes. There must be examples where, even in times of conflict, some international organizations that are able to operate in both places or have some credibility on the ground can find a way to do that. And as I said, I think that there are mechanisms that exist in Syria in terms of deconfliction, and also the fact that Turkey and Iran and Russia and these countries have all met on the sidelines somewhere. There should be some way to enable that to happen, and also to enable at least just an understanding of what is happening on the ground. How many people are missing in Aleppo or Tel Afat or those areas of Idlib, just to get a basic understanding of what the needs are, because maybe the needs are not as great as we think. It's not entirely clear.
And when we're looking at these pictures from Turkey on our screens, the devastation is hard really to comprehend. Obviously, the focus at the moment is on trying to get to anyone who is trapped under those buildings. The longer term need for help, for money, for resources is going to be huge in both Turkey and Syria, isn't it? Do you think the international community is going to step up?
I think the international community will step up temporarily, but it's important to realize, of course, there's so many other things going on. There's the massive conflict and war in Ukraine, where you also have millions of people displaced. You have huge areas of Ukraine that have been totally laid waste by warfare. So if you look at places like Marinka, areas near Donetsk in Ukraine, you can see whole neighborhoods and towns that are also destroyed, just like what we're seeing in Turkey. So, and I think we've heard from the UN over the last few years that there's, tens of millions of refugees and displaced people all over the world. So I think that in the end of the day, what we'll see in Turkey is we'll see a lot of aid go in, and it'll be interesting to see if it actually gets into Syria the way it's needed. And we'll see, I guess, over the next months or so up to the Turkish election, if they're able to actually, find all the survivors. I mean, sometimes it might take a month just to find survivors in some of these areas. We may not know the full toll for a very long time.
And in terms of resources, obviously there's some very, very wealthy Gulf states in the region. I mean, are they offering resources?
I would assume they are, but I haven't seen a lot of reporting on it. But I would assume that those states, Qatar is a very close friend of Turkey. You obviously have the UAE and Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, those other states. Some of those states are peace partners of Israel, and they're work there. So I assume that we will see those states sending delegations, or at least sending some sort of aid, or supporting, whether it's things like tents or food or things like that. I think we will start to see aid start to flow from there as well. I mean, they were also involved in the helping after the Beirut port blast. People should remember that lots of aid went into Beirut as well, and I think we'll see the same types of partnerships.
And on the ground, when you've got teams from so many different nations. I know that there is, again, precedent for how these things are coordinated, but given the very fragile politics in the region, I mean, how does that happen? How does that go?
I think Turkey has a lot of experience responding to disasters. I mean, Turkey itself has international aid organizations. It has several giant organizations that do this type of work. And actually, Turkey was very big involved in supporting refugees coming out of Syria. Turkey has hosted millions of refugees. It has refugees camps. It has infrastructure. Turkey has sent aid overseas. I think Turkey knows a lot about how to manage refugees and homeless people and putting up tent cities and setting up hospitals. You know, Turkey, I think, has an experience. I think the question is, of course, as you said, can Turkey enable groups that it has not gotten along with? For instance, there's a lot of tensions with Greece or Armenia, whatever. Will it be able to actually enable, you know, free flow of people? And also the Turkish government tends to be a bit authoritarian and has not liked having journalists poke around too much historically. So the question whether the government and regime will reduce and become a bit more flexible. But I think Turkey has a lot of experience in this, and they will be able to coordinate it on their side of the border.
Seth Fransman, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
እሺ አባይ እንዴት ናችሁ? ሰላም ናችሁ? ማችሁ ይሄን አይታችሁ መሰለኝ። እስቲ ተሰማችሁ? በግ ይሄን አይታችሁ መሰለኝ። ኮመንት ላይ አስቀምጡ ማለት ነው። አላህ ይድረስልን። እኛም ራሱ ያስፈራናል እንዴ! ሰው በሃይማኖት በዘር በብሔር ይጨፋጨፋል። አላህ ባላ እንደዚህ ያመጣል ደግሞ ችግር ነው ወላሂ። የሚሰቃለ ደግሞ ሱብሃንአላህ። ይሄ ደግሞ ቱርኪ ሸበካው እየተንቀጠቀጠ ወየት ነው ደግሞ ይሄ? ያ አላህ ምን በላ ነው ጎበዝ። ያ አላህ ይሄ ደግሞ ቱርክ ውስጥ ነው ደግሞ አሁን ይሄ ደግሞ ቃጠሎ እንጉር ነው መንቂያማ ነው። ያ ረቢ ጌታ ቱርክ እንትን እንግሊዘኛው ፌር አት ቱርኪ ያ ረቢ ያ አላህ ያ አላህ ያ አላህ ያ አላህ ያ አላህ ያ አላህ ساعدنا يا رب ساعدهم يا رب مدد يا الله يا الله يا الله.
Bakayım. Diyor limanın orada fabrika değil. Limanda bir şey çıkmış.
يا رب ساعدهم يا رب ساعدهم يا رب يا رب ساعدهم يا رب. يا الله. يا رب ساعدهم يا رب ساعدهم يا رب. يا رب يا الله ساعدهم يا رب. الله يلعنهم إن شاء الله إسرائيل. كلب زب يجوا اللي هنا يزهقوا.
Gel. Bakayım. Diyor limanın orada fabrika değil.
سيكو
Limanda bir şey çıkmış.
سيكو that is the inter Turkish fair department that and to what ብሎ ይስቃል። እስራኤል ለጉሂን ኢን ጂዊሽ አኪድ እናንተ እስራኤል ናችሁ የምትስቁት። ፖሊስ ባቢሎን حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. الله يسعدكم إن شاء الله يا رب. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل.
Böyle limanın orada, fabrika değil. Limanda bir şey çıkmış. Gel, bakayım. Böyle limanın orada, fabrika değil. Limanda bir şey çıkmış.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلين أهلين نادية، كيف حالك؟ أنا بشوف التركي، يا ربي الله يساعدهم يا رب، مساكنين. كيف حالك طيب سوي لايك سوي شير سوي لايك شير بليز يا رب الله يرفع لنا بلا يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب
የችሎታ ኑሮሽ በኔ ላይ እኔን የሆነ ነገር ታረጋኛለሽ ولكن ملء عين حبيبها ملء عين سلاهون شاهدوا ይሄ ملء خبر مقدم ነው ተቀድሙ ምንድነው ያልን ነው ዋጅብ ነው حبيبها ያለው ደግሞ መተአኸሩ ሙብተዳ ነው ዋጅብ التأخير ነው ኢላው ቀደም ያልነው نعم حبيبها ضمير የሚመለሰው ወደ ማን عين የሚለው ይቀጥሩልን فحبيبها مبتدا مؤخر وملء عين خبر مقدم ملء የሚለው ولا يجوز تأخيره ملء عين ያለውን حبيبها ካለው ማዘግየት አይቻልም ለምን لأن الضمير متصل بالمبتدا وهو ها حبيب በሚለው وعائد على عين ባለው ላይ ይመለሳል وهو متصل بالخبر فلو قلت حبيبها ملء عين عاد الضمير على متأخر اللفظ فينا قراءة الذات فاطر من لنا من الشباب إنما يخشى الله فاطر نوم على عليها إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء نار المنكر شذوذ إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء كترسال الله إنما